Does reward-based dog training actually work in situations where life and death are at stake? Well, you're going to talk to somebody today who's been in the trenches and seen it from first-hand experience. My good friend, breed of my fantastic jungle, John Fitzpatrick, former RAF police dog handler, and somebody that's been there, done it, and got the t-shirt. A really great conversation about the pros and cons of using aversive tools in training, and also his philosophies about breeding Malinois. So welcome to today's episode of Lifting All Ships. I'm speaking to my friend, and as I said in the intro, the breeder of my phenomenal Malinois jungle, who is just absolutely fantastic. I adore her in every single way. And it's down to this good man across the screen from me, John Fitzpatrick, commonly known as Fitz, who is a breeder of Malinois, Swiftandbold Malinois, but also has had a really, really interesting life experience leading him up to where he is now. Welcome, Fitz. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule or your busy days to speak to me. How are you keeping? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, Kamal. Yes. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So let's dive straight in and tell us a little bit about, obviously, who you are, what you do, and a little bit of your background in the world of dogs.
Okay. I originally, when I originally joined the armed forces, I joined the Navy as an aircraft electrician. Fortunately, I was rubbish at it. Yeah, I would never have flown in an aircraft that I'd serviced. But I was a very good boxer, so
Right.
I got a lot of time off work for boxing.
Right.
My boss wasn't happy with that, so he pushed me onto the security flight for 6 months to get rid of me.
Right.
During that period of time, the security flight was positioned next to the Ministry of Defence dog kennels, and there was 2 MOD police dogs there. And we're talking about 1979, so health and safety wasn't a great thing. After a couple of weeks, I walked across and said, "Who walks those dogs? Because it doesn't appear anyone ever takes them out." Handler was on the sick. A bloke threw me a dog lead. I went in with the dogs, took the dogs out, and spent the next 6 months walking around the airfield with the dog. And then decided that that was the career path I wanted to take. So I transferred from the Royal Navy to the Air Force, became a dog handler, and qualified as an RAF police handler in February 1981.
Wow.
I qualified. Yeah.
I was born in 81, so similar time span, really. Not much in it.
No, not at all. And to be honest, it was a decision I've never regretted. Yeah. Never for one single second.
So what were you doing before you joined the services then? Were you just, how old were you when you joined?
I was 16 when I joined. Yeah, I left school. I went to college. I lasted about 3 days at college. Decided that it wasn't for me. Yeah. And took a walk downtown. Walked in. When I look at how long the recruitment takes now, I actually went into the Navy Careers Office on a Monday, and I was in the Royal Navy by 2:30 the following Tuesday. So not the next day, 8 days. I was down in Plymouth, arriving down there for my training. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it takes about 9 months now to a year. Took me 8 days. Yeah.
Wow.
Not that I was good, they were just desperate.
So obviously you started off your career with one intention, and it sort of, as life happens, took you down that lane of working with dogs. So did you grow up with dogs?
Yes, yeah, we always had dogs when I was younger. Mostly your typical dog that lived in the house and slept on the front doorstep during the day. Yeah, came in at night, mooched around. When you're looking back to the 1970s, most dogs were in the house or sleeping on the front doorstep. Never did any training with them. We had a German Shepherd cross who was a right git. Absolutely wild. But then we got an Irish setter. We inherited an Irish setter from an elderly lady. And it really goes against everything that I always think about now. I always say, if you want to take on a dog, try and select the dog from the environment that you're going to put the dog into. Right. So if you're going to bring the dog up with kids, if you've got someone that's bred the dogs alongside kids, I think it's a good move. This dog went from living with an 80-year-old woman.
Great tip. Do you know that? You just threw that little gem in there. If you're going to get a dog, select it from the environment it's going to be brought up to. That sounds so obvious, but that's such a great little gem. Yeah, go on. Sorry, interrupting you.
Yeah, it's but this one was completely different. This was a 4-year-old Irish setter, very, very quiet, beautiful, natured dog. And she came from an 80-year-old woman to a family full of 3 kids. That was like a madhouse. And she just adapted overnight. She was just a great dog. And then, yeah, so we always had dogs. But I'd never really ever thought about, well, you didn't really have dog trainers, then, apart from Barbara Woodhouse with a tweed skirt. And I've tried them and I just don't look good in them. So, yeah, and like you say, it was more by accident I ended up in the RAF. But I joined the RAF specifically to be a dog handler. I had to become a policeman to be a dog handler, but the ambition was always to work with dogs.
Really? So back then, what sort of dogs did they have? Shepherds?
Yes, all German Shepherds. The RAF was quite late moving into Malinois. The Army, they moved into Malinois a lot earlier than the RAF, basically because we recruited dogs in different ways. The Army always bought dogs. Yeah, going back years and years, they bought dogs, but the RAF always had gift dogs. So all the dogs that were operational with the RAF until we combined with the Army Dog School, they were all gift dogs. People phoned up and they had a dog that maybe had a court order on it because it had bitten somebody, or the dog had just outgrown the home. And we got offered a phenomenal amount of dogs. I remember Blue Peter did an appeal for us in about 1982. And we got offered over 10,000 dogs over a 2-week period. And some of the dogs we got were phenomenal because we could afford to be so picky and choosy. And do you know what? I don't know whether it would work now. But, going back to those days, people were happy to donate the dogs to the services. And we got some fantastic dogs. I mean, God, I remember picking up one dog, and when I looked at the pedigree, I mean, it was just pure working lines. It was a dentist that imported it from Germany. They were all, it would have been Schutzhund dogs then, not IGP dogs. But they were all Schutzhund 3 all the way back to the history and everything like that. And we brought him in. He was just a fantastic dog. I mean, and some of the dogs were absolutely phenomenal pedigrees. Others were best part scrapyard mutts, but you know what? They did the job, and providing the dog had the character and the desire to do the job. And that was the thing I always looked at. Still the thing I look at now, just the dog want to do the job. I'm not a fan of forcing dogs to do stuff, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later about, selecting dogs and training dogs, and at what point you should terminate the training and say, do you know what, this dog doesn't want to do this,
So what was your first dog that you had in that role then? Can you remember?
Yeah, my dog was a dog. I was when I passed off my police course, we had about a 9-month wait before we could become dog handlers. During the early 80s, I mean, we were pushing through 25 policemen a week into training.
Wow.
I mean, now you're probably looking at 25 a year. We're putting through 25 a week. Going through training. The vast majority then wanted to go onto dogs because we still had the nuclear bombers operational, and they, the units like Waddington and Scampton were really top heavy with dog handlers. The patrols with the dogs, without the technology you've got now, surveillance technology, the dogs were just the ultimate deterrent and the best way of apprehending anyone who shouldn't be there. So I was at the school. I got held back. And I was what was called a continuation training assistant, which really served me later in my career because I worked with what was our special investigations branch, helping them out and providing sort of actors for their scenarios when they were training people. And it's something that stayed with me all the way through because my as a dog handler, most of the time your policing knowledge is absolutely rubbish. But I had 9 months of that, just constant sort of CID training before I went on to dogs, and I always sort of retained it. But I went to get my dog. I knew which course I was going on to, and I went down to see the dogs on the line. There was 10 dogs all lined up waiting to be horsed up with handlers, and I saw a dog. It was 9442 air dog Ben, and he was mean. He really was. He looked like your bog standard German Shepherd that would take your throat out in the early 80s, and I wanted him so badly. And I went back across to the instructor's crew room and sort of snuck across there and tapped on the door, told them who I was, and got a load of dogs abuse stuff thrown at me. But I said, can I speak to Corporal Mack, who's going to be my instructor? And they said, we'll see if he's in. Anyway, Dusty came to the door And I told him who I was, and I said, I've seen a dog across there, 9-4-2 dog, Ben. Can I have him? And they went, well, we don't know yet, because we match the handler and the dog. You know, we look at your temperament, we look at the dog's temperament, we take you down, we let you choose your own dog, but if there's two people want the same dog, then, you know, we make the decision who gets it. So, okay, then. I was groveling, I was begging him. And anyway, the next day when we coursed up, we went down, we met the dogs, we came back, we had a debrief, and he said, right, the other point he made, he said, that dog's, it's almost 3 years old and he's a bit of a hard nut. He says, so it might not be the dog that goes on a basic course. We might have to give it to somebody else, you know, more experienced. And I was gutted. And anyway, the next day when he come down, he said, all the dogs are free for allocation, apart from one, 9-4-2 dog, Ben. He's been allocated. I was absolutely distraught. Anyway, when we got down there, I'm walking along, I'm thinking, well, I wonder where Ben's gone. And he was still in the kennel. So I went back and I said, that dog's still in the kennel. And he went, well, he's yours, isn't he? And I went, well, he didn't say that. He said, well, I didn't say he wasn't. He said, I just said he'd been allocated, didn't say to who. So I went down, stood at the kennel, and the procedure was we'd sit outside the kennel for maybe half an hour, feeding some little bits of kibble through, getting the dog not to try and bite you through the wire. And Ben was really good. He was great. He sat down, he had some treats passed through to him. And then the instructors would one at a time come up and say, there you go, in you go with the dog. They'd go in, stroke the dog, just stroking it, tell him he's a good lad, spend 10 minutes in there, then come back out. And that's all we did. I managed to get my right arm in before Ben put 4 stitches in the back of my arm.
Wow.
Had to jam the door on my arm to prevent him getting out. Yeah, he took a piece out of us within the first 2 seconds. It was quite funny because he was a great dog. We worked really well together. But towards the end of the course, I thought all the instructors really liked me, because when we used to go for the walks, I always had an instructor with me. I'm making conversation, having chit chat. Yeah. And I said at the end of the course, I said, I thought you all really liked me. They went, no, you were so stupid about that dog getting on your hands and knees and kissing it on the mouth that we were expecting it to kill you. So we always walked alongside you with a padded sleeve, just in case I had to intervene and drag the dog off. But he was a fantastic dog. And unfortunately, he was a German Shepherd, yeah. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I passed out top of the course, and I was given the choice. I got my first choice of posting, which was RAF Bryce Norton, but they offered me a slot as a continuation trainer at the police school, and it was just too good an opportunity to pass up. And it was really fortunate because the lad that was in the next kennel to me, his dog failed at the last minute, so we just handed Ben across to him. And then he went off and took that dog away. So it was nice. I knew where the dog was going to. And then I had another 18 months there at the police school, just training dogs. And it was a massive education, I'll tell you that much.
I was just going to say, so your daily bread and butter at that point was literally training dogs and training young police dog handlers how to handle, you know, quite high drive, you know, quite worky dogs then.
Well, my role was just to train the dogs. It wasn't to train the instructor handlers, because I wasn't a qualified instructor. What we had so many dogs in the system, and obviously dogs, you know, they work well, but something goes wrong when they're on operations, or at some point in the trainer, or it might just be a breakdown between handler and dog. So the dogs would be sent back to the police school. And they had what was called a continuation training cell. So dogs that had failed for some reason, they came back into the system to be retrained. So that was my job, retraining those. And it was just a fantastic job. I mean, some of the dogs are quite nervous. They've lost their confidence. The vast majority of them were dogs that had displayed, you know, dog to handler aggression, where the dog had actually sort of redirected and bitten the handler. But I was on that job for about 12 months. And we had an absolutely phenomenal success rate. I think we had about a 99% success rate in retraining the dogs and putting them back into the system. We had a corporal called Steve Reese, who was just probably the best person who could possibly. There was like 4 young handlers, and we had Steve Reese, who was a full corporal. He'd been in about 10 years, and he was so patient and he explained things so well to you, and he matched you with the dog, and he monitored you, and it was. I've been really lucky in my time. I've had some of the best trainers ever train me. And, you know, when we come on later and we talk about punishment, remind me to mention about Dusty Mack, who was my original instructor. And just having those people who just had a real different outlook to what the standard outlook at that time was. And Steve Reese was phenomenal.
Let's get into that then. So, I mean, bearing in mind this is the early 80s, and this was the RAF. So, you know, and this is my impression, you know, please correct me if I'm wrong. But it was probably in those days, I know certainly from the pet domestic type training, it was largely, you would probably look at it as balanced, but definitely compulsive. We used check chains as a standard practice in pet dog training. There was a lot of force. Using treats and toys was largely frowned upon, or if it was used very minimally. It wasn't the done thing. So, I mean, and I would say a lot of the pet dog trainers at that time were ex-military, ex-police dog handlers, and there was that old school cola approach to dog training. So what was it like in those days then? Because it was a very different place, wasn't it? And you know, let's put the cards on the table. These dogs are not the dogs that you're working with. One, they are obviously, they may have pre-existing behavioral problems if they've been handed in. They've got to do a job where somebody's life depends on them, right? So this is not oh, my dog fails an exercise, I come second and I don't come first. This is somebody, or not just somebody, a whole platoon of people could die on the back of this dog making the wrong judgment. Because you're sending these dogs into basically war zones and to protect people's lives. So it's no joke. So what was the training like in that time then?
I think we were quite progressive in the way we trained. The instructors had an awful lot of autonomy. But I always say this to people who come to my training classes, that it was a balanced approach. But it was really funny that it was, when we were taught that we trained the dog on the basis of punishment and reward. And I always found it interesting that punishment came before the reward. And it was everything was based around the check chain, but we had some real sort of progressive trainers and progressive handlers. And I always tell the story that there's two stories that I always like when I always get people who tell me that I don't like prong collars because I don't know what a prong collar is. I went to the German military police school in 1982. Let me tell you now, I know what a prong collar is, and I know how they use them. And again, we'll come back and talk about that later. But I always remember with Ben, I had a problem. Ben was a real hard dog and he wasn't interested in me. I had a couple of bites off him. And Dusty Mack said, right, you're going to need to learn how to sort this dog out, son, because otherwise you're going to lose him. So we're going to teach you how to check a dog properly, check as opposed to choke. And I said, okay, then that's great. So he said, Saturday morning, you're going on kennels. He said, I'm going to be at home with my missus, but I'll come in for an hour and I'll spend an hour with you on Saturday morning, an hour with you on Sunday morning. And I'm going to show you how to check a dog. And once you've learned how to do it, you will need to use the bare minimum of compulsion with that dog. So I thought, game on. So I turned up on Saturday morning, did my kennels. It was absolutely peeing down with rain. I'm soaked to the skin. We didn't have Gore-Tex or any of that rubbish. You know what I mean? We were in combat clothing. We were piss wet through to the skin. And he said, he sent someone up. He said, go and tell Fitzy to get himself down to the we had an aircraft that we used to patrol around, get himself down there with his, to learn how to check a dog. So I come running down, it was about half a mile away. I went running down with my dog and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I've come down to learn how to check a dog. He said, what have you got there? So I've got my dog. He says, oh no, you're not practicing on the dog, son. Yeah, he says, you're here to learn. He says, we're not going to let the bloody dog be your stooge while you're learning something when you be rubbish. He says, get rid of the dog. So I run all the way back up to the kennels, put the dog in, run all the way back down with my lead. Use the old rope leads. I don't know if you've seen them. They used to be made in the prisons. They were really cool.
Of course. Right. Yeah.
Mine was 3 or 4 weeks old and it really softened up nicely. So Dusty says, right, give us that lead. So I went, okay. And he handed me a brand new one out of the packet. It was like an Indian rope trick. You could stand it on its end. It was so rigid. And he said, right, there's the check chain. And he put it on a great big post that was nailed into the ground. And he showed how to check the dog and across your legs and all that. And you step into the dog and then you check the dog against your leg. And he said, you're going to have to get your timing right on this, he said, because I'm going to make you do this until you get it right. He said, so let's crack on. So it's peeing down with rain. I've got this brand new lead. after about 2 checks, I barely had any skin on my hands. Yeah. And he went, right, let's keep going. After about 4 or 5, there was blood coming on my hands. And he said, do you see how painful that is? And I went, yeah. He said, what do you think it's like for the dog? And I went, well, not very good. And he said, and that's why if you ever have to check a dog more than once, you haven't done it right. And he says, and the other thing that I have to remember is you're not here to practice on these dogs. You volunteered to be and you get paid. He didn't. So get yourself up there, come back tomorrow for another go. I did it the next day. And you know what? I only ever have to check that dog twice. Yeah. Wow. And that's why when I see people now and they've got prong collars on the dogs for 6 months, I think, it's obviously not working, mate. Yeah, you're obviously not. Whether it's a good tool or not, it isn't working. Yeah, and it's supposed to.
But you know what really strikes me is, although you go the techniques of you can debate the pros and cons of using a check, but what a forward thinking, and there was a level of compassion in when he was teaching, because he's like, well, you're not going to make this poor dog suffer. Like, you know nothing, you don't know the arse end of a dog from the biting end. So let's first give you, really what he was teaching you was mechanics, timing, and understanding like the power of what you were doing. And you think, God, what a forward thinking. I mean, obviously the techniques you might, but that was quite some life lesson, really, Fitz, wasn't it?
And it was, and the thing that struck me was this was his day off. Yeah, he didn't. This wasn't his working day. This was his day off, and he came in on his day off, left his family, drove into work, and come and stood in the piddling down rain with me to teach me how to do that. He also was my instructor when I did my search course later and put me bottom of the course, so I didn't like him after that. No, I'm only joking. And he actually said that to me. He said, you're going to come bottom of this course. And I went, no, I'm not. I've never come bottom of anything in my life. He went, you will. I said, why is that? He said, because you're so used to having control over your dog. You're good at the obedience. You're good at all the sort of real general purpose work. You're fantastic at it. He said, but when you train a search dog, you've got to allow that dog the freedom to think and to operate and to work. And he said, you're going to struggle with it. And you know what? He was absolutely right. I did. He was a really cracking bloke. Yeah, he really was. And again, I've been so lucky to deal with people like that all the way through. Yeah. Coming onto prong collars, I went to the German. I was either the Bundeswehr school. I don't know if it was German Bundeswehr or whether it was the Feldjäger, their military police. I think the two schools were combined at the time. And I remember being shown how to use a prong collar. Mm-hmm. And this German warrant officer brought the prong collar out, and it could have been Dusty Mac as a German. Wow. And he got the prong collar, and he said, "Right, you're going to attach the prong collar to your dog." So everyone puts the prong collar, and he showed them how to be fitted, and everyone clipped the lead onto the dog, and he went, what are you doing? Putting the lead on the prong collar. Oh, no, you're not. And he took, I don't know if you've seen the paracord, the real thin cord, attached that to the prong collar, and he put it around 2 of your fingers. He said, that's how much pressure you need to use on a prong collar if you use it right. If you go too hard, it slices into your finger. So once again, there was a consequence that if you didn't do it right, you were the person who was going to suffer, not the dog. And again, I thought that was a real progressive way of doing it. I've never used a prong collar since. But when he demonstrated it, the dog did twitch, but it cut into the handler's finger. When I see people now with their dogs on, 8-foot leads on prong collars swinging them around, I just think, even if you could agree with it, how can you agree with that?
Well, that's, that segues nicely on the fact that, obviously, those that know you or don't know you, you're quite, you're not a wilting flower. You're not happy. You're not afraid to voice your opinion about these things. But it's so, do you know what I find is so fascinating is, there's a couple of things that are ready from this conversation that I just find it phenomenal is, it's which I think that everybody who trains dogs should have. It's the amount of hands-on experience you've had with training dogs. Like those days when you were, like you said, wet through to the bone, trudging around cleaning kennels and training dogs. That was your apprenticeship into what you do now, isn't it, really? And there's, you can read 1,000 books about training, but until you get your hands on training, physically making contact and training the dog, and whichever approach, whether you're going to use the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's to make sure that you have the skill set before you go anywhere near a living, breathing animal. I mean, what a profound set of lessons that was for you, Fitz.
I like I say, I go back and I look at people that have influenced how I've trained dogs. And take it from me, I've met a lot of knobheads. I really have. And I've been quite happy to tell them, knobhead, and just walk away. But I won't name the person, but a real a handler who I really admire, and a trainer who's been absolutely successful. I went to a training seminar going back. Well, Alice was a pup. Alice was she must have been about 13 or 14 months. She wasn't able to compete in working trials, so she was definitely under 18 months. And we trained with this handler. And I went to this training seminar, and I'd been to a training seminar at the same location about 2 months before with Anne Bussey. All the people using clickers and treats, and everything was going great. And then I went back, and it's almost all the same people, but this time they've all got the dogs on prong collars.
Right. So
I went, why have we got dogs on prong collars? Oh, this is how we train at this place. And I went, okay, then. Well, I'm not putting mine on. And they went, well, you know, you're going to struggle. I said, well, do you know what? I'll struggle. I'm more than happy to struggle. I don't do this because it's easy. I'd rather learn a bit. And you know what? I did my first track, and Alice hadn't tracked for about 5 or 6 weeks, so she was really excitable. And she went fast, and she went right. She was a little bit wonky, and she came off. And the instructor said to me, you know, you could slow your dog down a bit if you put on a prong. And I went, I won't be doing that. And his response was, smashing, let's move on. We'll carry on training the way you want to train your dog. And he went massively up in my estimation for that, because never once did he try and train me. I'd also judged him when I was the judge at the service dog trials. So I judged him in the past, and he judged me, and we knew what each other could do. But he had his way of doing it, and I had my way of doing it. And he never once tried to persuade me. He just went, that's fine. You don't want to do it? You know, don't do it. And I, you know, he went up in my estimation of that. But when I spoke to other people there, I said, how confusing is this for your dogs? 2 weeks ago, they came to this place, and they were all trained using a clicker and a treat. And today they've come back, and they're all on prong collars. I said, I actually think it would be better if you didn't bother clicking and treating your dog. You just use the prong collar. For the simple reason that at least you're consistent with your dog then. It's because what message are you sending out to your dog here? And I says, and that's one of the reasons I wouldn't do it with Alice, is because well, one, I've never had the need for it. You know, it's quite one of them things. You know, I've never had the need for it. So why would I use something I don't need?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, interrupting you there, but so
no.
Back with the services, then let's just go back to that period. Obviously, they were compulsive, and you were fortunate to have several mentors that taught you probably the best version. If you're going to use those techniques, they had a level of consideration for the dog, but the services were still compulsive based. So you still had So was there a shift at any point? And because obviously, as I said, you know, you're very much about rewards. You're very much about reinforcement. You don't use aversive tools. You're very vocal about how you train your dogs. Very, So when did that? Was there a shift? And in you personally, you know, what was it? How did that all come to be?
See, I know when I made the shift, but I'm not sure about when the services made the shift. Just to go back over the service training, the big thing with RAF training that I really admired, and I use it a lot in training even now, is, and I think where we've come into clicker and reward-based training, we base so much of the reward around a toy or around a food treat. And the thing that we were taught to do is we were taught to praise our dogs, but it was hands and voice, And it was amazing how much you could get with hands and voice. And I always remember years later, John Rogerson had the same sort of thing. You don't need to use food all the time. Just speak to your dog nicely, put your hand down, give it a little touch. You know, never underestimate how valuable a little touch on the dog's ear is, a little tickle on the head, how much they appreciate it. And that was something that they really did hammer in the RAF. You know, use your voice inflection is so important. And I think it's something that we've really lost in training now.
Oh, 100%.
I always say to people, and the way I like to explain it to people is, if you get your voice inflection right, you will get your dog to work. And the way I like to explain it to people is, imagine you've got a marble on a tea tray. When the dog's working, that marble should be nice and steady, and you should be just having a little, good lad, mate, When the dog starts to flag a little bit, it's going to tip one way, and you're going to G the dog up a bit. Come on, mate. You're going to get the dog happier, get him working. When he starts to get too excited, you're going to slow it back down. It's going to tilt the other way. Yeah. And you need to say, whoa, steady, mate. And you need to get him down there. And the way you can raise a dog or speed a dog up, slow a dog down, just with the use of your voice and slight little change of your body movement was something that, again, I obviously saw good handlers using that technique. Yeah. It was never sort of taught to me that, this is how you do it. But watching some really good handlers going, oh, I like the way he's doing that. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to use that in my training. And it's something I always stress to people in the training here that, we're going to use a clicker. Most of my training is based on clicker work. But I always say, what we've got to do is we've got to get these dogs working for long periods of time. Never underestimate a nice little word to your dog, a little tickle on its head, just to keep the dog working and getting it working and happy to be next to you. And the other thing is, and I say to people all the time, have you got something wrong with your legs? And they go, what do you mean? What's the matter with your legs? Do your knees not bend? No. Well, that's why I said to you, get down and fuss your dog. Don't stand there and give it a scratch when you finish. It's worked bloody hard for you. Get down and make sure he knows that you value what he's done to you, done for you. And I have people who go, we're going to get dirty trousers. Well, next week, turn up in shorts, because next week you're going to be on the floor with that dog, cuddling up to it and telling him what a great dog he is. And again, it was something I learned when I was at the Defence Animal Centre.
What really strikes me again is, because there's part of me, it's ironic that I'm actually thankful for the way in which I started in training, like with a more compulsive base, because I think what it does, and we didn't use, when I started training, we didn't use food and toys really. And what it taught me was, again, it taught me things like inflection of voice, how to use my body language, how to really genuinely praise my dog. And it really taught me timing, because when you mistimed a correction, there was a massive fallout from it. You would feel, not only like you said about you felt it physically in your hands, I would feel it physically in terms of, I would see it in my dog's behavior. The dog would either shut down, or I would get, the dog, there would be fallout. So what it did is it taught you how to read dogs. You read them to the point that you could see what was going on in their head. So you knew how much pressure to apply or not to apply, how to lift them with your voice, etc. So and it sounds to be similar to you, the path that we both took was actually beneficial to how we train dogs now, because it made you more insightful and it made you read the dogs. Whereas I think often what I see now is people get so stuck on, the technicalities of, oh, he's licking his lips, he's doing this and that. And you've got to look at the greater picture. You've got to be able to get inside that dog's head. And as I said, I totally agree with you. People have lost the art of just talking to their dogs and using it. Whilst I'm a clicker trainer and there's certain things that I'm silent on, where I want my dog to problem solve and think and give it that space, when I reward them or praise them, it's from my gut. It's from my, it's very much about a relationship. And it sounds to me like, well, I've seen you with your dogs. It's the same thing.
That's exactly what it is. And I always say to people, the use of treats and the use of food and the use of toys is part of the bigger picture. Yeah. But it's not all of it. The big thing is the connection between you and your dog. And when I was at the Defence Animal Centre, when I finished there, I was the senior instructor. The one thing I liked about the Defence Animal Centre was we had an Army warrant officer and an RAF warrant officer. I was the RAF warrant officer. And when you went in there, you were invited to amend the training manuals. So as you had handovers, you reviewed these manuals and you changed things and you brought things up to date and you put your own ideas in, which I really liked. And I made very, very few changes. When I went in there, I was in the Special Investigations branch. I was the warrant officer on SIB for about 2 years before I went back onto dogs. When I've been promoted, and I was on a big court case down in Bristol with Customs and Excise, so I was late going into my job. I should have gone there in about the November, because I was also going in to set up the Young Military Working Dog Training Program or Development Program, so I was late arriving. But when I arrived just before Christmas, and the Colonel said, "You'll be wanting to review the training manuals and see what you think." And I said, well, I've actually reviewed most of them, because when I was down in Bristol waiting to go into court, I spent most of my time reviewing the manuals. And when I went back in, I said, I've made all the amendments that I need to make. And he went, what, really? I said, yeah. He said, well, normally it takes about 3 months. And I went, it didn't take that long. And he went, oh, okay, then. So have you got an amendment list? I said, yeah, I've got the amendment list. And I said, every single manual has been changed. And he went, okay. So I gave him the amendment list. And he went, there's only like it's only like 2, 3. There's only about 4 or 5 words on the thing. And I went, yeah. And he went, well, what's this load of old crap? And I said, well, read it. And all it said was consequences shape behavior. Yeah, that's it. Everything that goes in that manual is great, but never forget that principle. The consequences shape the behavior of the dog. Yeah. If you've got the right dog, the consequences that you supply to its actions, whether they're aversive or positive or reinforcing, you will influence how that dog behaves. And if you always remember that when you train the dog, I don't think you go too far wrong. And I like the fact that we were allowed to review the books. But I also used to pee me off because it did wherever I went in the RAF. When you went into a new post to take over from it, the first thing everybody did was change everything. I don't like that. Change this. When I used to go in, they used to go, what are we going to change? I used to go, nothing. And they go, what? I'm not changing anything. So I'm going to see how it works for 3 months. I'll wait for 3 months. I'll watch what happens. And then in 3 months' time, I'll say, these are things I like, these are things I don't like. And 9 times out of 10, most of the things that you would have changed, you don't actually change, because actually you can see the purpose behind them, because you see that in a different context. Actually, this is the best way of doing things. And I like that when I train dogs as well. You know, when I get people who come up and they go, I've trained my dog using this command, that command, the other command, shall I change it? So, well, does it work? Well, yeah. Why would you want to change it? If the dog's got a good association with it, the dog's happy with it, why would we change it? If the dog's got some sort of negative association with that word or the way you're doing it, well, let's see how we change it. But I always want to see how the dog works before I go in and say, oh, I don't like that, I want to change this, I want to change that. And I think it's the same with humans and dogs. You know what I mean? If they're not broken, don't fiddle with it. You know?
Absolutely. And you know the thing, I think you get that with all management, don't you? Get they want to stamp their mark, and I think and also, and I'd say it's similar in dog training. I think people sometimes do things for the sake of fashion and trends, as opposed to going, well, hang on, you know, what I'm doing isn't. And I mean, obviously, I've been training dogs a little while, as have you. What we did in the past wasn't all bad. You know, it wasn't like, you know, we weren't just getting big clubs and whacking our dogs over the head. And I was having a discussion with one of my students who's only been training dogs for a relatively short period of time, and you know, the picture that she was painted of days of old was, you know, it was like we got off the ark and we were beating the crap out of our dogs to get them to do anything. No, it wasn't like that at all. We've refined our techniques, and there is a lot of, as I said in my, I think there's merit in how we have trained dogs in the past. So coming back to your career in the services, I mean, what I'm, you know, your wealth. I mean, we could talk about your career as that would be such a fascinating conversation, all the things that you've done, but bearing in mind,
Kamal, they wouldn't be.
Some of it might be illegal or might be X-rated. So bearing in mind, you are training dogs to go and do a job where there is a lot depending on it, right? And as I said earlier, there is people's lives depending on it. What level of, I suppose, what would the training, would there be compulsion? Would there be force? You know, would there be, in your opinion, is there a justifiable reason to say, okay, if this dog doesn't do X, I need to use? Was there a standard protocol for when you would use compulsion? What was, just paint the picture from that?
I think there was a big change from the 80s. So when I went through my training, there was, when I've completed my training in the 80s, when I was handling dogs operationally, I was working in this country in Northern Ireland, you know, all over the world in different countries. And I think there was there where you looked at, there was an operational need to get the dog to perform. Yeah. But again, even really relatively early, I always found that there was a better way of doing it. Very, very rarely. The only time that I actually thought that using a punishment on a dog was if you just needed to immediately stop a behavior. You know, this was something that was dangerous to the dog. The dog was going to get killed if it did it. Bang, you stop it. Yeah, and I always find that punishment is very, very good at telling the dog what not to do. But unfortunately, then it never tells the dog what you do want it to do. Yeah. And I think in 99.9% of cases, it doesn't serve a great deal of purpose. You know, you can stop the dog performing a behavior without punishing it. You know, people go, oh, well, you're using compulsion if you don't let your dog run a road in front of a bus. That's just stupid argument, isn't it, to be honest? Because you wouldn't do that. Same with the child. Oh, yeah, let him run over the road. He'll soon learn the lesson. You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But that's and I'm a big fan of preventing the dog practicing the behaviour.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And especially in classes when I say to people, why are you letting your dog do that?
Yeah.
Well, he's barking at the other dog. So what are you going to do about it? And they go, well, I'll shout at him or smack him when he does it. But why is he barking? Well, he's barking because he's frustrated. Well, why don't you take him away and then bring him back and introduce him to the dog? All right, okay. And 9 times out of 10, it works. Sometimes it doesn't because the dog is so fearful. You say, well, why is he barking? Well, he's barking because he's scared. Why don't you try taking him back 10 paces and see if he's still scared?
Yeah.
Oh, funny enough, he's not scared now, is he? Yeah. So now we can remove him that situation where he doesn't display that behavior. Because again, and I don't know who told me this, is, training is simply practice for real life. And if you allow your dog to practice barking at another dog, that is how he'll respond in real life. If you take the dog out of that situation and say to the dog, come on, mate, just come over here and relax. And yeah, there you go. Now you're safe. You're 10 yards away from the dog. You're great. Here's a Kong. Have a little go on that. What a good boy you are. And then train the dog there. Well, next week, bring him 9 paces away from the other dog. And I just think that, I always regard when I punish a dog, and I'll be honest with you, but I think that when I look back at the times I've punished dogs, whether I punished the dog for the dog's sake or because I was pissed off at myself and frustrated, I always regard, if I have to punish a dog, I always regard it as a failure on my part, because I've either failed to plan the scenario properly, I've misjudged how the dog was going to feel in that situation. And obviously, as I've got more experience, I do that less and less and less.
Yeah.
But 9 times out of 10, you just think, if I'd have planned that situation better, I wouldn't have had to punish that dog, or I wouldn't have to correct the dog. And so I always regard it as a bit of a kick in the teeth of myself when I have to punish a dog. But I can't remember the last time I punished one of my dogs, to be honest.
I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that often there's so many great points that you've made there. One is to say that to plan your sessions around. I think often what happens when we resort or consider using a punisher or an aversive, if you want to call that, really and truly, it's because we've put the dog in a situation where they're not either ready for, they don't have the skill to deal with, they don't have the knowledge, and they're just probably overfaced. It doesn't mean overfaced they're scared. It could be they're over aroused, they don't have the prerequisite information, etc. We're asking too much too soon of them, and so forth and so forth. Or certainly with our breed and with Malinois, the classic thing that they do is they do so much bite work when they're puppies and they get them riled up, and then they say, oh, by the way, I know you've been doing this from more or less 8 weeks old to a year old. Now I want you to stop and let go. And you go, well, what a back to front way of thinking about it? You don't really have to teach a good Malinois to bite. They want to bite naturally.
Like teaching a goldfish to swim.
Exactly. So I often, in my opinion, it's where aversive tools or compulsion comes in, is because really from a trainer's point of view, if we're really honest, there's a gap there's something missing in the information that we've given, or we haven't planned sufficiently. So, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate then. Like, I have a dog, and this dog is Fitz, you've not seen a dog like this dog before. This dog is absolutely off its nut. And it's a high drive Malinois. I got it from some dodgy bloke with a skinhead, ex-military bloke, the worst kind, But she's manic. She's going to definitely kill a sheep. She's chased sheep times. I think that I'm going to have to use an aversive tool. What say you to that?
So, first off, what's your relationship like with your dog? That would be the first thing we want to know. So what will your dog, so you say your dog wants to chase sheep, so it's, you're going to need to use an aversive tool. Can you actually get your dog to sit next to you and be quiet for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
And because people go, oh, we chase a sheep. My dog won't come back when he's 50 yards away chasing a sheep. Will he come back when he's 2 yards away and he's not chasing a sheep? Well, no. I think we need to fix that first. So the first thing I'd look at is the relationship between the dog and the handler and what the dog can already do. Yeah, because I'm a big fan of actually utilizing what the dog already knows, if it's good stuff. You know what I mean? And again, to me, prevention's always better than cure. And there is an extent where you say, every dog will have its limitation. But again, you can push these limitations out. And I always look at with my dogs, again, it's about understanding your dog, understanding what the dog's limitation is, and and training it appropriately. I mean, why putting on an electric collar? What would, let's say, an electric collar, or what would that teach the dog to do? Well, it'd teach the dog not to look at sheep, would it? Okay, so what happens when it diverts onto something else? Will it work against cats or anything else? Why don't you teach your dog impulse control? Yeah, why don't you look at a different way around it? And I look at it and I think to myself, and I do it because I'll be honest with you, I've got alpacas. I've got a herd of alpacas outside the window there, and I brought in a little dog called Rocket, a little Dutch herder. 3 of them, big mistake. Took 3 of them on, 3 rescue dogs, took them in. 2 of them went out quite quick. Rocket was a right bonehead. But at the rescue centre, they had donkeys and pigs. And Rocket's favourite game was to charge up and down that fence, barking at the donkeys and the pigs. Yeah. So as I brought him here, first thing I did was put him on the lead, take him out, and just let him look at the alpacas. Yeah, let him look at the horses. God, he was spinning around like a lunatic. Yeah. So we'd look. When he'd calmed down a bit, we'd take him away. We took him out. And after a couple of days, he's like, they're a bit crap. They don't really do very much, do they? They just stand there and look. While this was going on, I also took him in another compound and got him working with a ball. Yeah. This is what you chase, mate. This is what you're allowed to chase. I understand the fact that you want to chase things. This is your prey. You go at that. And I worked him at the ball. Probably within about 3 weeks, we could take him into the field right next to the alpacas and throw that ball around, and he would completely ignore the alpacas. Just completely blank them. Not even a second glance, because we satisfied his need to chase stuff. And I am a fan of that I don't like suppressing behavior. If a dog's got a desire to perform a behavior, to me, I would rather teach the dog to perform that behavior in a safe manner. Yeah, in an acceptable way of doing it.
Fitz, you're dropping these gems left, right, and centre. You're on it today. You've obviously taken your pills this morning. You're on it, mate. I said that.
I can say, yeah. I just look at things, and I think sometimes we look at. So what's the problem? My dog wants to chase sheep. So the problem is not the fact that your dog wants to chase. It wants to chase something that's unacceptable. Yeah. But again, it's about knowing your limitations, because I have 2 things that one, I would not trust Ajax around sheep. Yeah, he'll go in the field with the alpacas. He'll go in the field with the horses. Yeah. He's great around cats. Yeah. But there's something around sheep. And as soon as we go near them sheep, his ears prick up, his nose goes, and it's Ajax, back here, son, on the lead. There you go. Once we've walked 20, 30 yards past the field full of sheep, he's fantastic. He can go off again. But I think to myself, no, I could spend a lot of time teaching him not to do that. And I think, actually, can I be asked? I'll just put him on the lead for them 20 yards. Yeah. So he shows. Yeah. And again, but it's about observing your dog, isn't it? I don't wait until he's 60 yards up the road chasing a herd of sheep before I call him back. Yeah. I'm watching my dog while I'm out with him, and I see a change in his behavior because I understand my dog. And then I say, oi, come here. Yeah. I can hear a football being kicked 400 yards away. Yeah. Because when Alice was a pup, I used to take her to Liverpool, and next to my mum and dad's house, there was an all-weather football pitch. And Alice used to love barking and running up and down the fence. I should have stopped her doing that, but I didn't. Yeah. And now I know full well, after a criminal, Alice can run 60 yards and I can call her back when she's 5 yards behind him. I couldn't do that with a football. So again, I hear that ball, Alice, back here. And she's like, oh, God, no. And as long as she stays within 20 yards of me, I know I can recall her. Yeah. Whereas the other dogs, I'd be happy to let them go 80 yards away. Again, it's about knowing the dog's limitations, about reading your dog, about knowing what.
Honestly, Fitz, there's so many things that I just want to reiterate, because like you said so many things that are absolute gold. So coming back to our age-old argument that we have with say our Malinois and high drive dogs and argument for the use of aversive tools is, well, the hypothetical situation where, well, my dog can't be trusted with livestock. So, again, I've shared this on social media. I have a lot of dogs. I walk them in the field. I live in an area that has a lot of sheep. My dogs are trained to know that those sheep. Now, my previous dogs, when I moved to this area, I live in London, I wouldn't have 100% trusted them, and they didn't ever do anything. But I knew they showed a level of interest. That was a Malinois, a boxer, 2 Malinois and a boxer when I first moved here. And the reason being is they had really good recall, so I didn't ever have to concern myself. But again, like you, I was aware that I thought, would I put my life on it? Probably not, because I wasn't proactive, because I lived in London and then I moved here. And to be honest, in London, we don't really come across in East
Not
London.
many sheep, is there?
No, exactly.
Yes.
But to be truthful, I didn't bother training it because I thought, well, there's nothing, it doesn't affect my lifestyle on a daily basis. I moved here, I had sufficient control where they didn't chase sheep, etc., because of it, and they were manageable. The ironic thing, the one dog that did chase sheep of mine was my German Spitz, and he was the easiest of the three because he's obsessed with food. So I just waved a treat in his mouth, boom, that was that sorted. So of the 4 dogs. However, when I obviously got Jungle, I was already living in this area, so I was very proactive about it. So I raised her in a way that she just sees sheep, like you mentioned that dog sees the alpacas. That's boring. So that's one. Be proactive. If your life entails you being around livestock, get them around it. If you share stuff on your social media of you raising your puppies to ignore your alpacas,
all around them.
Beautiful. Second thing that you said, which I think is an absolute gem, is if your dog can't be recalled off a sheep, can your dog be recalled 20 foot away from you with no sheep? That's your starting point. Let's assess that and let's evaluate your relationship with your dog. Absolutely, like that is just gold to get people to understand that. And I'd say often the dogs that are out, for example, chasing sheep and running amok and whatever that heinous thing that people then go, well, that's a justified reason. Hang on a second. Let's look how well trained this dog is. Does it have a recall? Does it have a sit? Does it have a down? Can you do that in front of a ball? Can you do that in front of food? Can you do that with somebody else waving a toy in front? Well, if your dog can't do that, there's no way it's going to be doing it in front of the sheep. So rather than whacking an aversive tool, let's actually educate the dog. Fantastic. Other thing is, like you said, don't suppress the behavior, channel it into something that's healthy, and use a ball, use a toy, use play. Absolutely, like just those things in themselves, absolutely fantastic. And the final thing, which I think is absolute gold, is be realistic about your relationship with your dog. If your dog, you don't have to, this is not a ego stroking activity to go, I'm going to take my 15 Malinois in a flock of sheep that are running around like headless chickens and expect them all to ignore them. No, don't be a twat. Just put them all on leads and be a responsible person. And there's no need to be an ego of I want to have my dogs, walking through sheep because my ego says I can. It's like just put it on a lead.
It's it always makes me laugh. The other thing is people who do it and they say, well, I need to be able to do that because my dog runs off but if your dog run off, then well, my dog, I didn't see the sheep. What were they wearing? Camouflage clothing? How did you not see the sheep? Well, I went into a field. My dog went into the field ahead of me. Well, why would you do that? Would you come down to a main road with a 2-year-old child and say, "Off you go, mate. I'll be with you in 5 minutes." You'd call them back and say, "We're coming to the road now, mate. Let's take your hand. Oh, look, this is busy." Why wouldn't you do it with your dog? You take your dog down. We've got a couple of fields here, and they're used at different times for crops and sheep and stuff like that. So I never let my dog go into a field that I haven't actually had a look at, and well, one's if it's over a brow of a hill. So I'll walk my dog up. I know I can call my dog at 40 yards away, so we can go 40 yards. When I'm 50 yards away from the brow of the hill, I call the dog back and I put him on the lead till I get over the hill and go, there's no sheep here. I'm not being funny. If you're not bright enough to do that, one, are you bright enough to own a dog in the first place? And two, Jesus Christ, I wouldn't touch you with any form of electronic equipment because you wouldn't be a relative kid. And I always think that the people that want to use these tools have failed with the real basics. And the argument always comes is, well, if you know how to do it, they're great tools if you're educated. Well, so's a lead, mate. This person couldn't be trusted with a lead. Are you really going to trust them with that?
But I think that the fact that sometimes I think that the picture that is painted of the relationship that people have with their dogs is the one that's probably causing us the problem. Like, for example, oh yeah, I can have my dog out of sight and I can call him back from being 2 miles away, blah blah. Why would you? That's just stupid dog ownership. Why would you want your dog to be like, I would be, if I don't see my dogs around me, I'm thinking, where the hell's that dog? Because you go, like, my dogs are like, I don't mind them going off and they'll go in where I walk is obviously wooded area. I can see them. I love them to see them running through the woods. I love it. But I know that I can call them back, and if I see them and I think, oh, I can't see where you are, or I'm calling that dog back because I don't want the risk of them knowing. Never mind. what if there's something there that might hurt them, or I want to see, is that a good owner or bad owner? I just go, it's a realistic dog owner. It's a bit like you said, if my child was out, I'm not going to just go, I'm going to let her out in a busy space and then let her figure out. I'm going to go, where's my child? And I think that we have that disconnect of having this, I don't know if it's even a realistic relationship where my dog should be able to be anywhere and everywhere with unlimited freedom, and I don't have to be in control of it or in sight of it, and it should know how to miraculously behave. That's a fallacy. And I think often the argument for that relationship and then the justification of tools is a false one, because that's not responsible dog ownership.
And the other one is it's all or nothing. It is an electric collar.
Yeah.
No, so you want to die. There's quite a lot of stuff that goes on between those two extremes. But you made a good point there about you made a good point there about a wooded area. Well, one, the signal that you fire from an electric collar is interfered within a wooded area. Yeah. So there's going to be a delay. That when you use it. And the other thing is, if you're in a wooded area and you can't see your dog, why would you ever dream of using an e-collar on it? Because the dog could be coming back to you.
Yeah.
So unless you can actually see clearly, surely that is some. I mean, it's a bit like, it's like going into a wooded area and firing a machine gun and going, oh, I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. You know what I mean? You've got to be sensible about how you use things.
And you've got the walking group there now, all been desecrated because you thought you're going to do your AK-47. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
sorry, mate. Yeah. Didn't know there was a primary school around the corner.
Yeah. So sorry, go on. Now you go.
No, go on. You say.
I was just going to say, so on that point. So coming back to some of the things that you've done in your career, we've obviously, again, scratched the surface of some things that you've done. You've trained dogs for the military and obviously to be on the front line, and you have used minimal punishment even with those types of dogs. Okay, and that was probably largely because that was the tradition and the practice at the time. Moving forward, you've also trained your own dogs. So Jimmy, let's talk about Jimmy. Jimmy was a really, really awesome dog, and he was, because again, the common myth is that, well, that stuff will work, that positive crap or that reward stuff will work on that soft, weak, insipid little thing that you've got, but it won't work on the real dog like mine, because my dog's a real dog. Well, Jimmy was no joke. Jimmy was an absolute awesome dog. So who was Jimmy? Tell me a little bit about him. And obviously, because he was phenomenal. Even it was a phenomenal dog, but what some of the things he did was phenomenal as well. So just
so let's not talk about him in the past tense. He'll get upset because he's downstairs at the minute. He's happily retired. Right. Okay. So Jimmy, and this comes back onto, you mentioned before about how you breed dogs and how you raise them. I bought Jimmy off a chap called Mark McFadden. He had a kennels called 39s up in Kilmarnock. And he was breeding Malinois, and he was the first person who trained a KMPV dog in the UK. He bought a dog from a lady called Marion Salets over in Belgium, brought the dog back here, trained it, went out and KMPV'd the dog. When he went across there, they says to him, so who have you trained with? And he went, nobody. Well, how have you trained your dog to KMPV? I watched a lot of videos and I trained dogs, and he did it. And he qualified and he brought the dog back. So Juice was Jimmy's mum, and she was a beautiful bitch. Quite small, very hard little dog, but beautiful natured. And that's what I always look for in a dog. I want a dog with a kind nature. I want a dog that bites because I teach it to bite, not because it's nasty. Yeah. And anyway, when I was buying, I got recommended by Moira Rogerson to go and have a look at this litter and speak to Mark. So I spoke to him. Now, at the time, I was buying litters of pups, or having the potential to buy litters of pups for the Army and the RAF. And we came up with some fantastic breeders, because I was sent in to set up a breeding program for the Army and the RAF. And the first thing I did was cancel it and say, we're not ready for this. I had two reasons why I wanted to cancel it. One was because I wanted to use the very, very best operational dogs in the breeding program. But in order to do that, I had to take that dog out on the front line. And that was a dog that might save lives. But then you have to look at, if I've got this bitch, she'll then produce 6 or 7 puppies that will also save lives. But there was always that discussion. And then I said, hang on, there are some fantastic breeders out there who take all the risk, we get first dibs on the litter of pups. We pick the ones we don't, the ones that we don't like, we leave with them. And that's what we did. And we got some fantastic dogs, German Shepherds, Cocker Spaniels, some Labradors, and quite a few Malinois. Well, Mark was the first person I spoke to referring the Malinois. I went out and seen a lot of idiots. I mean, some people, again, it always makes me laugh that, oh yeah, I've got this dog, it's a world beater. Yeah, both parents, IGP3 dogs. Brilliant, let's go down and have a look. Went down, had a look. Right, let's go out and let's go do some work with these dogs. What do you mean? Let's go and do some work. Let's go and see your IGP work, IGP3 work. So where'd you compete? Oh, you don't have to compete. What? So someone gave you an IGP3 certificate, did they?
Yeah.
I don't compete, but if I did compete, they'd be IGP dogs. I said, mate, if I played football, I'd be playing for England. Go on, get stuff. Just walked out. I just drove back home. Yeah. But when I spoke to Mark, the thing that struck me is that most other people, when you phone up and say, I'm from the RAF or the Army and I want to buy all your puppies, the pound sign starts flicking up in their eyes. But Mark was really, well, I don't know whether I want to sell any dogs to you. What are you going to do with them? I need to come down and see. And I tell you what, he put me right through it.
Oh, really?
And at the end of the conversation, I was like, right, okay. Well, so where did you get my number from? I said, well, Moira Rogerson gave me the number. Now, do you know Moira?
Yeah.
I mean, Moira Rogerson phoned me up and she said, at the time, she said, I'd never paid more than 30 quid for a dog. And I paid whatever it was for this dog. And it was the best value for money I've ever had. And he's got this, and he's got that, and he's got the other. And I think my quota here was, I'm not being funny, Moira. If I gave you a house brick, you could probably turn it into a work and trials champion. So it's no great recommendation.
Yeah.
And she went, no, they are good. But Mark was really offhand. And it was only when I mentioned Moira's name that he went, well, let me have a think about it. And he phoned back half an hour later, completely different bloke. Oh, yeah, how are you doing? Like, yeah. Because obviously
he'd gone off and done his due diligence on you. Yeah,
absolutely. So obviously he'd gone off and spoken to Moira, and I'd trained dogs with Moira in the past, and everything was great. And so anyway, I went up to see him, and he said, "Come up and see me dogs." We went up and seen them, and the thing that struck me about them was how calm they were. That they would steam in for a bite, and the second they were given the out command, they would sit, and their tails would little wag stiff, and then they go again. The second they finished work, it was like you just switched them off. They turned from a working dog into a pet dog.
Wow.
And I just loved them, and I said, I really want the opportunity to buy them. So I put an order into him. There was another bitch called Miss Red who I nearly bought from him for myself. But there was a bit of a dispute over the ownership, so I couldn't take her on at that time. So I went back to him and I said to the colonel, I wanted permission to have the option to buy the whole litter, but he wouldn't let me have it. He said, no, you can have a maximum of 6. So I said, okay. Anyway, when I didn't get misread, I went back and asked him if he had any male dogs. And he said, well, I've got a couple. And I told him what I wanted. I said, I want a dog. I said, I'm going to train it up. It's going to do all the military training. I'll do all that. I want to enter into the Service Dog Championships. But I also need this dog to live in the house with me. And I want to be able to take him to the pub and buy him a pint and a bag of crisps. And he went, yeah, I've got one of them.
Wow.
So I went, oh, okay. So he said, Mr. Blue, he'll be your dog. And he sent me up to see a chap called Nelson Smith up in the Northeast. And Nelson had the equivalent of Mr. Brew from the previous litter.
Right.
Went up to see Nelson. Nelson got this dog out the back of a van, did some bite work. And the second he finished the bite work, took the dog into the little cafe, and the dog just sat there with kids playing with them and all sorts of stuff like that. Just, again, completely switched off. And that's the quality I saw in those dogs, the fact that they could work, but they could be absolutely trustworthy in social situations. Until you tell them to react differently, those dogs are going to be really good. And that's what I've always tried to breed in my dogs. I took Alice, who was Miss Red's daughter. I bred her. And again, the sire that I picked was an IGP dog called Faro. And I could see his work. It was fantastic. I really liked it. But the thing I liked about it was Greg brought the dog down to a puppy class to introduce it to me. And he got this IGP3 dog out, which promptly jumped out the van, ran around the puppy class, said hello to everyone there, licked all the pups, and run back to Greg. And I thought, yeah, straight away, I thought, I like that dog. Regardless of how well it works, I like that dog's character and I like that dog's temperament. And then we went out, we did bite work with it, it was an IGP dog and it competed for Great Britain. So I knew it was a good dog, but I wanted to see what its character was like. And I think with breeding Mallies. I just think that's just so important.
Okay, so asking the other question, why does that matter? Like, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here. So why, I've got a Malinois. I don't care if it likes people. I don't care if it likes people or not. It can live in I can manage it. But I really want it to bite. Why does it matter if it's a social dog? Why does that matter?
Well, a couple of things is what you said that it doesn't matter. Don't want to be in it, but most people have to live in the real world. I mean, I had it when I retired my RAF dogs that had been taught to bite for 7 or 8 years, and then I adopted them and took them home at the end of their service. And I had to spend 6 or 8 months teaching them that you're not allowed to bite people, mate. You know what I mean? This isn't how it works. And I had 3 of my retired dogs that I took on. Every single one of them was absolutely phenomenal. But you have to change the way they are. But what I want with a dog is I want a dog that will work, but doesn't want... I want a dog that works because he enjoys the work, but he's not at work all the time.
Yeah.
That's
a great way of putting it. I love that.
He has to live. He has to live with me as a part of my family.
Yeah.
He has to be able to walk around the field full of alpacas. We've got a dog training school here. We have 70 people a week come. Yeah. I can't risk one of my dogs going out and biting one of those puppies. Yeah. So my dogs have to be able to. And I think the other thing is as well, if I'm going to teach people, this is what you should be striving for with your dog. I don't want some knobhead that has to be chained up all the time that I can't near people, because they're going to look at me and go, well, hang on, you're teaching me how to get my dog nice, but you've got to keep your dog caged all the time.
But more interestingly, so this is, I suppose, asking you, bearing in mind how many dogs you've taught to actually bite, okay, for services, real work, pretend work, playing as a hobby, service. You've done the whole span. You've done it from a civilian point of view. You've done it from a military point of view, and law enforcement, etc. So you've done all the versions, okay? In your opinion, do you think that it makes a better or worse biting dog if the dog has a social, easygoing temperament? Do you think that is a better biting dog or worse biting dog, in your experience?
Well, see, I think there's more to a police dog or a military dog than the biting. So that, for me, I would, if you asked me if it was a better working dog, I would say the social dog is the better working dog. I've had dogs that you couldn't go within 3 miles of anyone with because they'd want to kill them. Yeah. And also dogs that were wired up all the time. Tell you what, working one of those dogs professionally is an absolute bastard nightmare because they want to have a go at everyone. And also, they react to the tiniest little thing, which you don't want them to. The best dog I had that I worked operationally for 2 years in Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. And he, Dennis, his name was, he was an absolute lunatic. Fantastic dog. But everyone used to take the mickey out and go, he's like Denzel, he's like some bloke on spliffs, because he was just so chilled out.
Oh, really? And
you would walk around with him, he would be, he just looked like he was half asleep on patrol. But I tell you what, you knew when he picked something up.
Wow, really?
Because he was alert all the time. He wasn't looking for everything. He was like, but when he saw something or when he smelled something or heard something, there was just such a contrast in his attitude. Yeah. And it was fantastic. It was just such a dog to read.
What sort of dog was he, Fitz?
German Shepherd, long-haired German Shepherd. He was the worst dog they had out there. I won the UK championships with my RAF dog. And again, when we talk about good instructors, I worked with some fantastic instructors. Then I worked for a chap called George Pace. George Pace was a phenomenal dog trainer. He was the only RAF handler who had ever won the United Kingdom Championships, the German Championships, and the Near East Championships, all with different dogs. Yeah. So they weren't the same dog moving from theatre to theatre with different dogs. And he was the first RAF handler ever to train a Schutzhund 3 dog in Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, which he bought as a puppy, and he trained it as a civilian club, which is how I got to go to the German school with Pacey. And he never taught me anything other than how to read dogs, how to think about how I train dogs. And I'd say to him, he'd come out and go, we've got a bit of a problem with that dog, son, haven't you? And I'd go, yeah. And he'd go, what are you going to do about it then? And I'd go, well, I thought you were going to tell me. That's not my job. Yeah, what are you going to do about it? And I'd go, well, maybe I'll try this and that. And he'd go, okay, I'll see you next week. And he'd come back and he'd go, that worked really well, didn't it? That was great. Or he'd go, what do you think? And I went, it hasn't worked as well as I hoped. Well, what's your next plan? And I'd go, well, I'll try this instead. He'd go, I would have done that in the first place. And then he'd just walk off again. But we won that championships in 1983, and we were the shortest team ever. He was the youngest dog ever, and we got the highest points ever. It was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah.
And that was the service championship, Fitz?
Yes, yeah, that was our RAF Police UK Championships. Yeah. And he got the highest points ever. Just phenomenal dog. And that was because I took everything that Pacey could teach me. Yeah. I then, when I got promoted, I got my own dog section. And I had a lad on the section there who we won the UK Championships with 3 times, simply because I passed on what George Pace had passed to me, and it just got passed down the line and refined. So I think I want that social dog, and all those dogs were, none of them were lunatics. They were all good, balanced, sensible dogs. And I think I'll be honest with you, when I see some of the crap that's being bred in the Malinois world, and I just think it's. Someone once said to me years ago, I can't remember who it was, they said, a good salesman doesn't sell you something that you need. A good salesman creates the need for something that he's already selling. Yeah. And that's how I look at e-collars. Yeah. I'm telling you now, that's how I look at them. Breed dogs that are so freaking mental. The only way that you can convince people to take them on is to use an e-collar on them. And I just think, but if you hadn't bred shite in the first place, you wouldn't be using those tools because you wouldn't need to.
Absolutely. And coming back to that, your point about dogs. So my opinion in working with sports dogs, and I have obviously worked with the police and law enforcement in terms of as a consulting capacity. My feeling is that in both worlds, there's a distinct lack of understanding between a dog that is aroused and a dog that's a driven dog. And a driven dog with a social, stable temperament is able to distinguish friend and foe in terms of law capacity. They can mix around with somebody, but they understand almost instinctively. And that's what, to me, what a good working dog, a good police dog or law enforcement dog should be, is the ability to switch that on and off, or trained well enough to switch it on and switch it off. But ultimately, they should have a stable, sound temperament, because, you know, it's a bit like, you know, you were saying you're a boxer. I've done a lot of martial arts in my life since I was about 5 or 6 or 5. And one of my instructors always used to say, empty vessels make the most noise. He says, you don't want to look at the person that's getting himself all riled up. He says, you want to look at the person that's quiet and deadly, just waiting for the bell to go, because boom, he's going to be the problem. And it was absolutely so true. The one that would be getting it up and would give all the bravado, they would fizzle out, and they would either, you know, they would be over aroused and overstimulated. But the one that was just patiently waiting, really super relaxed, just loosening themselves off, you knew, gosh, this is going to be a problem, because they were channeling all that energy into a given moment, and they were focused. And then you took them out of that context, absolutely nicest guy, but you put them in that context of, you know, the sport, different ball game. And for me, that's the same that I think of dogs that do bite work, any sort of dog sport. You don't need the dog that's Hannibal Lecter. You need the dog that's going to be, you know, the absolute Mr. Nice guy, friendly, social, calm, level-headed, anybody open, etc. But when you say, hey, we're going to now do the game, or this is a real situation, that dog should be able to switch on and distinguish between the two things. And it really does sadden me that with the breed, I mean, I've had the breed for, oh God, 20 plus years. And you've had them probably even, you know, probably longer than that. And you go, it's a shame. It really is a tragedy what is happening to them. And I'd say, if I'm honest, a lot of working breeds, working line shepherds, Dutchies, you know, even the gun dogs, even labs, even cockers, they're breeding them now to be so over aroused that you take them out of the work and they are just impossible to live with.
Yeah.
There's no joy in owning those types of dogs.
I come back to, I told you when I went to see the Jimmy prototype, that one that Nelson Smith had. Nelson had a Mally that he'd worked in IGP and working trials. And he said, oh, she's a fantastic working dog. But you know what? I don't like her. And I went, really? He went, I don't like her. And he says, you know this dog here? He said, if I never won a certificate with him, he is a fantastic dog to be around. And I always think back about that, because you know what? You've got more than me. Yeah, but I pulled out a load of rosettes the other week. Freaking great big box load of them. Yeah. There must be about 150 rosettes in there, and trophies and all that sort of stuff. I never look at them. I never even see them. But I see my dogs every day. And that's what's important to me, is not what's stuck on your wall. It's what's on the end of that lead. And when you take them out, because you can have a dog that's never won a rosette. He's the most fantastic dog to live around. You can have one that's got hundreds of them, and you wouldn't give them, time and space. And I know which dog I'd rather have, And I look at these pups, and again, when someone said about, with the puppies, with your Mallies, what do they like ragging? I said, no, mate, I've never ragged them. And they're like, what? Never ragged them. Why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
Well, because you want to see how they'll bite. It's a Mallee, mate. It'll bite. Yeah. What I want to see is how it uses it. I want to see how it used its nose. I want to see how it used its brain. And the two little pups that I've got, I really like. They're both just natural retrievers. They really are. And I'm not being funny. If they'll retrieve a ball, and be really driven to want to go through that hedgerow, they'll go through that hedgerow to retrieve a person as well. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I want that dog that is really enjoys the game, wants to play with you, but wants to play with me. I put a little thing on with Ren when I was throwing the ball for her, and the first thing she does is grab it and comes hurtling back and nearly breaks your ribs to get back in and play snuggle with you. That's what I want. I want the dog that wants to work with me and enjoys it. And it's just bloody play. I mean, everything you teach your dog to do is just directed play. When people go, "Why teaching your dogs to detect explosives?" No, it's teaching the dog to point at a scent, which means he gets a Kong. That's it. Yeah, that's just the middleman. Yeah, the dog wants the Kong. If he puts his nose on that scent, that Kong is going to come. It's all he's teaching the dog to do. The dog doesn't know what he's doing. It's play. Yeah, even when your dogs are biting, most of the time, it's a game. Yeah.
So talk about Jimmy. Jimmy was a phenomenal dog. Just kind of bringing it back to that point. Did he win the civilian?
He won the Service Dog Championships. We entered the British Police and Services Championships for the Service Dog of the Year, and that he was reserve champion.
All the services, right? So that's RAF, Army, Police,
and prison service. And also affiliated members to the BPSCA, ex-policemen and all that type of stuff. So he won that twice. And he was reserve champion twice. I mean, the first time I entered him as a bit of a joke, because I just thought, well, I'll give him a go and see how he goes. And we came second, and I thought, oh, I quite like that. And he was great. But the second year, when he won it the second time, his performance was just fantastic. And we were so far ahead of everybody else. But you know what he always won it on? Because you know what? Dogs chasing down a field and biting is a given. Dogs doing a standoff is a given. All these things are. If your dog must do that before you'd even be competing at that level. Jimmy won every single one of them competitions on his nose work. Really? Yeah, he also won the search competition every year. We won it 3 years out of 4. The only time he was ever beaten was when his brother won with Neil Lasada up in South Yorkshire Police. Yeah, and we were both the only two competitors to get all 4 articles, and Ace beat Jimmy by about half a second. Yeah, and but yeah, they were the only two that did it, because they had that nose work as well, because they could do everything. Yeah, they could do the obedience, they could do the agility, they could do the bite work, they could do the standoffs, they could do the recall from an attack. But the thing that they had over the other dogs was they had that ability to search as well. And I do that with all my dogs. All my dogs are trained nose work. I trained Jimmy to track from 8 weeks old. He never had his first bite until he was about 9 months. Yeah, everything was about using his brain and using his nose.
And to say, I mean, the thing is about Jimmy was he was. So just to so people listening can understand, you've got a dog, a Malinois, who on the obviously a national competition against the dogs out there in the trenches doing it for real. Like what I do is playing around with, it's in comparison to what you've done in the past in terms of real. And I have obviously as ex police officer as well, I understand what the difference between a dog that you're putting into situations where it's not just, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, if your dog messes up, my dog messes up, the worst thing is my ego's bruised and I come second or I come last. Big deal, right? There is no real consequence to my dog not performing correctly. There is massive consequence to a dog that's in the army, in the RAF, in the prison service, in the police. There is massive consequences. So you've got a dog, and that's one thing to say. Second thing is this is a high drive Malinois. This is a Malinois from working lines, a really, really strong working dog, a male Malinois in tire, and he's won this championship twice and he's come reserve twice. How many times did you have an electric collar or e-collar on him?
Never. He's never wore. He's only wore a check chain one day, and that's because he lost his. It was the day he qualified CDX because we did working trials as well, and I turned up at the trial. Turned up with his bloody collar because even in the service dog championships, he had a bloody pets at home collar on. The judge pissed himself laughing. He went, "What's that?" I went, "So I haven't had a chance to change it." He had a little bloody tiny blue collar with bones on. You know, and so he's never had an e-collar. He's never had a prong collar. He's never been trained on a choke chain. He wore a check chain one day because, like I say, I had to put something on him. I went, shit, I haven't got anything. I've lost his collar. And someone says, I've got this. And I went, and honest God, it was like a necklace. It was so thin. If he'd have moved, it would have snapped. Yeah. So I just put him on that, and we had to take him on at that, and he did it. But he has been entirely trained on balls, and I gear his reward system up. It's a treat for the basic stuff. It's a nice treat for the harder stuff. It's a ball for the harder stuff. Yeah. It's a con on a rope for the harder stuff. And when it comes to the bite work, I exchange a bite for a bite. I have a bite pad down my pants, and the second he has told Jimmy out, bang, he gets a bite from me. Yeah, that's his reward system. I made the mistake once of smacking Jimmy's arse. Yeah, I did it for a joke. It wasn't as a punishment. I don't know why it was. We were down in the alpaca field doing something, and I had a wood saw, about a 2-foot-long wood saw. And Jimmy always had a fat bum when he was a pup, when he was younger. And he was walking in front of me, waddling. He was like the Beyonce of the dog world. I don't know what possessed me, but I just thought this would be really funny to smack him across the cheek of the bum with this saw. You know, just give him like a little smack on the arse. And I went, boom. He went absolutely mental. Really? He spun round, and I thought he was going to take my nuts off. Wow. And he went, and I went, Jim, I'm sorry, mate. And that gave me a really good insight to how Jimmy would react if I used punishment to train it. Because, you know, I'm really quite attached to my face and my limbs, and I don't think he'd... So with Jimmy, it's cooperation, you know? And it's about cooperation. But you raised a really good point there about, you know, a sports dog and a working dog. And the way I always look at it, and I remember saying this years ago when someone said about, you know, oh, well, it's all the same, isn't it? I said, no, it's not the same. I said, because you know what? My attitude is when I train my dog to go into a competition, you win some, you lose some. Yeah. My attitude when I trained my dog at work was you win some, you lose once. Yeah. You go into a situation, where someone put...
Oh, I lost you, Fitz. You're on mute, Fitz. Oh, you're on mute. You muted yourself there by mistake.
Have I lost you?
And you're back now. So go back to that point you were saying about you
win some, some when you train a pet dog. When you're training a dog in Afghanistan or Iraq, you win some, you lose once. Yeah, you don't get any second chances. And this was a thing about selecting the right dog for the job. And I had this discussion when I was there. I had it with the Army, I had it with the RAF, I also had it with the civilian police when they were saying, this dog, he's a bit weak on the bite, he's a bit weak on this, he's not great on that. But if we up this and we do that, then maybe we can. And my answer would be, why would you want to? And they go, well, because, and I go, hang on a second, yeah? Now, when I was at the Defence Animal Centre, we lost 2 handlers out in Afghanistan, yeah? And the one thing I said was, our commanding officers could say to their mothers, we gave your son the very best training, the very best equipment, and the very best dog that we could possibly provide. And it was still painful to do that, because they went through some terrible things. Imagine how we'd have felt if we said to them, well, you know what? That dog was always a bit iffy, but we did our best to overcome them problems. You know, no, you don't want that. My opinion is, if a dog doesn't want to do a job, don't make him do it. There's plenty of other stuff he can do, because it's my ego. Oh, get your dog trained to do this. No, do you know what? If my dog doesn't want to do it, I put all the training I can in. But if I look at that dog honestly and go, the dog just doesn't have what it takes. The dog isn't motivated to be able to do that work. He doesn't want to do it. Then give him something to do that he does want. Because I think too often it's all about our own ego. I'm not going to fail with my dog. I've failed with loads of dogs, yeah, but they've all done something productive that they really enjoyed afterwards. Yeah.
But you know that I think you summed it up there. I think that often, and that's why I wanted to really articulate the point that what the world that you've come from, and you have made the choice in that world to not use tools or aversives,
Mhm.
or maybe at a point in your career you use minimal
Yeah.
compulsion, or you know, whatever, however you want to define that. But certainly, it wasn't a go-to with your philosophies and how you raise your dogs. And those dogs were dogs that were on the front line where it really did matter. And I sometimes think the use of, you know, the use of aversive tools or compulsion is largely down to, okay, that stuff won't work, will work with your pink and fluffy dog, but it won't work with mine. Well, we've shot that one down in flames. You've got dogs from really strong working lines, and it wasn't like Jimmy was a one-off. You've had, obviously, as you said, you had
Yeah.
other dogs that you've been successful with in terms of
Yeah.
you know, doing the real job and been successful in your competitions. You know,
Mhm.
you clearly trade, literally, probably, if you clocked it up, you're talking thousands of dogs, thousands and thousands of dogs.
Yeah.
But that's the first one point. So it's that even with your choice, and you know, as I said, the magnitude of what you're being asked to do, you went, you know what, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think if I train the dog thoroughly enough, if I put the work in, if I create that relationship, I can train the dog effectively to be an effective tool for the job without the use of aversive equipment.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, as I said, is the dogs that you've had have not just been, you know, weak, they've been really powerful, strong dogs who have you know, had the lineage, have the genetics, etc., where a lot of people will attach that to the justification. Well, it will, you know, that's the type of you've got that type of dog, you need to have these options available to you. And the other thing is, again, then the big thing, which I really think is really, if we strip it all back, is it's ego. It's really about,
Yeah.
certainly, I think a lot of times with sports, we get so attached to you know, the rosette, the accolade, the title, that sometimes you go, are you, you know, at the end of the day, for me, like you, my dogs are first and foremost my family and my pets.
Mhm.
Like, you know, I would have them if they never want a thing in the night. You know, half of them are bloody oxygen stealers. You know, like sugar don't do a bloody thing. You know, you know, I wouldn't be without any of them
Yeah.
because they don't. I don't go, oh, because that dog doesn't compete. She doesn't get the best food or the best bed and blah blah. They get treated the way that all my dogs do because I genuinely love them, and I know that my successes, if you want to call that, is purely about me just basically patting myself on the back and saying, aren't you wonderful for going winning? The dog doesn't give a toss about it, the truth be told, for
But you
me.
know the other thing there, though, Kamal. Yeah, those dogs that you've had the success with,
Mhm.
you might not have had that success without the oxygen stealers. Yeah,
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
they teach you so much about why aren't I getting through to this dog, you know, and you might figure it out too late to make a success of that dog, but you'll carry that knowledge on to the next one
Absolutely.
that you go with.
Yeah.
You know, I've always learned more from failing than I ever had from success.
Yeah.
Yeah, every single time when I've looked at a dog and I've gone, bloody hell, if I'd have just done that, and next time I will do it, I will do it different, I'll do it better. Um, and you know, I just think to myself, you know, why do we want to have dogs? You know, I want to have dogs. When I train my dogs, I look at dogs as sort of part of the family, but not like, oh, me little fair
Yeah.
baby,
Yeah.
none of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
old
Yeah.
bollocks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always say to people, have a relationship with you with your dog who's like you're his boss, but you're also his mate.
Yeah.
And you can be both. I mean, some of my mates from the RAF, you know, and the army finished as colonels and stuff like that, but we stayed mates.
Mm.
Yeah. But they were still my boss, and I still respect them because they were fair. And the way I look at it is, I expect my dogs to do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay.
Mm.
Now, that pay might be food, treats,
Mm.
toys, or affection,
Mm.
but I don't expect my dogs to work for freebie. Yeah, my dogs work with me. Yeah, you know, as opposed to being slaves.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that when I come off a training field or do an exercise with my dog, however I feel about something, I hope my dogs feel the same way. I hope my dogs come off and go, that was fucking great. I don't want my dogs to come off all browbeaten and yeah, they've won the badge, but they've hated the experience. I want them to enjoy it. You know what I mean? And I want my dogs to feel free to make mistakes. And it was a real good bit of advice. And I think it's even more important when you've got an operational dog. And I think it was Rod Roberts who said, once you've got your dog up to a really good standard, and you've got all the basics there, and the dog is working really well. Set him up sometimes and put him in a situation he doesn't understand and allow him to work it out. He said, because the last time you want that dog to have to use his brain was when you really need it.
Yeah.
Teach him to use it, set him up and point him in the right direction, but don't do it for him. And when I thought about it, I went, you're telling me to do that with my dog the same way as George Pace did with me as a handler. Teach him the basics, get him working well, and then put him in a situation and see how he works it out. And I think you're doing it with the same handler and doing it with the same dog was a real good way of doing it. I got those 2 bits of advice 30 years apart, and they're both equally valid. Don't allow your dog to be scared to make a mistake, because and this is where, when you come into punishment, the dog doesn't do the bad behavior. You know why he doesn't do the bad behavior? Because he doesn't do anything. He just thinks, I'm not even going to think about this. I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to just shut down here. This is a safe place to be. I don't want my dog thinking like that. I want my dog thinking about everything that's going on around him. Because especially with an operational dog, and the other thing that I had with an operational dog, someone said, you get your dog to out by using an electric collar or a prong. So the dog outs because you inflict pain upon the dog. But surely the criminal or the terrorist is going to inflict pain upon your dog. I want my dog to bite harder when someone hurts him. I don't want him to leave. I want my dog to leave on command when I want him to do it. Kamal, I'm going to have to go, mate. I've got someone here to look at a puppy.
Honestly, Fitz, there's so many great bits of, there's so many things there. I appreciate you've been busy and you're taking your time out already. I just want to wrap up one final question then. So if there is one piece of advice that you could, bearing in mind you've given so much already, if there's one piece of advice that you could give somebody who has got a dog and they're considering, alternative ways of training, that you might not as an individual agree with, what would you say to them? One piece of advice.
I think the first thing I'd want to ask them is why you need to teach your dog to do this. Why are you training your dog to do it? Find out why they're training the dog to do it. And then based upon that answer, what they give there would be where I would steer them to. Because the thing is, you might need to do stuff in an emergency situation where you need to stop this behavior getting any worse. And I think there's a difference between using something to stop the behavior dead, but I still think then you have to go back and train the behavior from scratch. So I just think that when you use something like an aversive to stop the behavior there, there's other ways of stopping the behavior and preventing the dog practicing it. But I think the only way you truly ever change that behavior is when you stop the dog wanting to perform the behavior. Now, you can stop the dog wanting to do something because you hurt it if it does it. But to me, that only works as long as the risk of the pain is there. If electric collars worked, you'd use them twice, you wouldn't use them again. When I work my dog, service dog championships, we don't even have a dog on a collar. The dog works naked. So if it works, why is your dog still on it? That would be the question I'd ask. Let me see all these people that promote these things, but their dogs are still wearing it. Why? Because he needs to know it's there so that he still responds. Well, he obviously hasn't learned the lesson properly, has he? So I just don't think it. If someone could show me that if you use the e-collar on that dog twice, you never have to put it on again, or you only have to put it on once a year, then I would go, okay. But none of them ever do that. It's always there. It's always the ever present there. Whereas if it worked, you wouldn't need to use it again. So I would just ask them to think and take different advice, and speak with people who've. Be honest, I speak with people who've been training for longer than 7 minutes and learned off the internet. Because you'll never find the answer to a dog problem on Facebook.
On that note, I just want to first thank you for your time. It's been, I could chat away to you for hours. It's been fat.
I'd like to come on again and have another chat about some other stuff, but I don't know what it'd be. But I'll answer questions on anything, mate.
Right.
Because I'd like to find out a bit.
I'll let you get on. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And if you, Fitz does have a book called Educating Alice. I'll share the details of that in the description. But again, once again, Fitz, thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Lovely. Remember, you win some, you lose once.
Take care. my conversation with Fitz and finding out more about his world and how he trains dogs and his principles and ethos, just click like and subscribe to be part of lots of conversations on Lifting All Ships and to support the further conversations. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know how I have lots of gems and interesting conversations. All the best. Take care and be safe.